All right, everybody. Welcome. Good evening. Good evening. It is a great honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker, Professor Attilio Petruccioli, a distinguished scholar whose contributions to architecture, landscape, and urban studies has profoundly shaped the field. Professor Petruccioli's academic career spans decades and continents, leaving a lasting impact on both scholarship and practice. From 1994 to 1998, he served as the Aga Khan Professor of Design for Islamic Societies at MIT, where he also directed the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture, a leading center for the study of Islamic urbanism and architectural heritage. He later extended his influence to Harvard University, further deepening the academic dialogue on architecture and cultural landscapes. In 1998, he returned to Italy, where he became Dean of the Faculty of Architecture at the Polytechnic University of Bari, a role that he held until 2004. During his tenure, he worked to transform, by design, a small academic institution in southern Italy into one of the leading international research centers for the study of traditional urban environments and the integration of modern information technologies into physical restoration and social revitalization. His dedication to advancing architectural research has resulted in an extensive body of work. He has authored and edited more than 32 books, covering topics such as architectural design, the history of Islamic architecture, and the methodology of design, including landscape and contextual design, typological research, and the work of modern architects. His research interests extend from traditional settlements and housing to Islamic architecture, urban and territorial studies, and Mediterranean landscape architecture. Professor Petruccioli has also played a significant role in architectural research beyond Europe. In 2012 and 2013, he held the Mishreb, I pronounce it wrong probably, sorry, property chair at Qatar University, contributing to studies on urban regeneration and sustainable development in the Gulf region. His work in Middle Eastern and Mediterranean architecture has provided crucial insight into the interplay between heritage, conservation, and contemporary urbanism. Beyond academia, he has also founded the Biblioteca Orientalis and the Islamic Environmental Design Research Center in Trani, Italy, institutions that continue to serve as valuable resources for scholars worldwide. His pioneering research and dedication to education have made him a cornerstone in the fields of Islamic and Mediterranean architecture. On a personal note, I had the privilege of studying under Professor Petruccioli in Bari, where he was my thesis professor. His work and teaching play a fundamental role in shaping my passion for architecture and architectural research, and I owe much of my academic and professional growth to his guidance and inspiration. His ability to bridge rigorous scholarship with unwavering enthusiasm for discovery is something that continues to resonate with me. It is with great admiration and gratitude that I welcome Professor Attilio Petruccioli.
Well, I have to thank many persons for this event and this invitation. First of all, the Dean of the School of Architecture of Notre Dame University, and then my good friend, Julio Cesar Perez Hernandez, for proposing this invitation, and my former nice student, Giuseppe Mazzone, for this long and very probably exaggerated introduction. Thank you to all of you, including the other friends that of the school that are attending this conference. I have to say that I feel a bit emotion, but I also think that to say that this evening I feel like part of a family. It is not a formality. We are an happy minority of architects that believes in a different idea of architectural design. And now when I say we, I tend the Western society in general, we are facing a very deep crisis. We live in a sort of eternal present, and we are not capable of designing the future. We, the Western society of the architects, are similar to the Isaiah Berlin's fox that teaches dispersed and occasional forms of knowledge lost in a flow of information. The fox thought is controlled by chronos. Chronos is the time that devours and consumes. On the contrary, the hedgehog represents the organic world where everything is brought back to an ordering principle. It lives in kairos, the time that has memory. I would like to say that I want to feel, I feel very close to the idea of being a sort of trying to be a sort of hedgehog. The title, the first part of the title of my conference is called "In Praise of History," because I believe that the study of the past history with its concreteness of the facts is the bulwark against the loss of the sense of the space in which we operate now, and the loss of understanding of the time. But which history? Not the history of the postmodern or architects that consider history a sort of cabinet full of images that they can sort at their will. But the process of the history that has an origin, an evolution, and arrived up to us in the moment in which we operate. It's exactly what I said, the time that has memory. I also think that history is operative for the architects. We are not journalists, we are not historians, we are not geographers. Those people describe the reality, but we as architects, we are entitled to transform the reality. Therefore, the history, if doesn't teach us how to make design, is useless. Well, I think that now we can start with the slides and the image, and we comment, and I will try to explain my thinking. I will try to explain why I feel your school very close to my ideas of architecture, and maybe to share some ideas with you. We start with this sentence of Nietzsche that is very, very deep and important. That which distinguishes truly original minds is not being the first to see something. Sorry, I have to move. Something new, but seen as new, well-known, seen and ignored by all. Which means basically that the knowledge is not based on the practice of the architecture is not based on the invention of strange puppets, but it's based on finding. It's finding versus inventing, finding the the rules, the principles, the basic idea of the architecture, and finding in the history, in the product of the history, in what the history has left during the process and its evolution. Well, so trying to evidently finding, what is left, what is offered by the history to us We can start from the landscape, which is the biggest scale of the architecture, still architecture, but big scale. And in order to understand this process, I have put together this diagram. I think in squares, you don't mind it. You not necessarily have to use squares, but I have put together this diagram of space and time, actually, in which I compare what is in the landscape, the relationship of the nature and artificial. That means the intervention of the man. And on the horizontal on top, I have schematically organized the nature in 4 elementary morphologies of the land. That is from the left to the right, the ridge, the slope, the bottom of the valley, and the plains. And in the vertical line, I have put and organized 4 conditions of progressive complexity of the aggregation of the parts, or the artificial parts that I have resumed in very simply. On top, you have a small courtyard or a small farm, a small aggregation that could be a small village. I have an instrument. A small farm, a small village without hierarchy, without any institution or public building and so on. And municipality, that means already an important aggregation that is as institutions and so on, and a big metropolis, something like that. Don't worry about the fact that I have selected very schematic elements, minimal, because this diagram can be in any moment. You can open one of those quarters or quadrants, and you can put indicator on the ascisses and or ordinate. And I can give more deeper, but it's not necessary for our discourse now. It is possible. So what if I cross, for instance, the ridge that is here, that is the most simple structure that we find in nature, but also the first used by the man, and the beginning, the origin, if you want, of this relationship between the man and nature. So if we cross them, so we get what I call type, or typical territorial type, if you want, in which I report schematically the little farm, the paths on top of the ridge, and so on, and schematic agricultural activity, minimal. Okay, we are talking of prehistory in this moment. We can cross all of those, and all of those are 16. They are typical territories. Okay, the territory, the types in which we have a balance between the questions asked by the nature and the reply of the man, in this relationship, are those that are in diagonal. So there is a proportion in this case. In the others, there's no proportion. Either the questions are pushed by the nature too much, and the man has a problem in following and to give a reasonable reply, or he hasn't the technology enough, and so on, or vice versa. But all of them exist. No, if you take, for instance, something like the municipality, you know, on top of the bottom of the valley. That's very typical, thinking of Italy, you know. Many, but also along the slopes, along the hills. It's not so balanced, but many exist. Think to all the hill towns in Italy, for instance. So anyway, we have this situation. That what is interesting is that you can read this diagram synchronically. That means now, okay, and you list a lot of examples of the way I've done. But if you look at the diagonal in this sense, you realize that this diagram can be read also chronologically. Because, as I said, first of all, we have the man is moving and living on top of the ridges, because the ridge is dry, because the ridge is the only path that can be used without technology. It exists in nature, and also it was for millennia the highway of the prehistory, for the big immigrations from one continent to the other. We have a second phase. The second phase that is represented by the sediments on the slope, you know, that require certain technology to implant your sediment. For instance, the small villages, of course, because the economy is minimal there. It's we are at the beginning of the Neolithic, if you want to put some dates and so on. And then we have the municipality at the bottom of the valleys, and clearly the big metropolis can survive, and they can develop mainly in the plains. The plains are totally artificial. They can survive only if the man have the technology to manage them and preserve. Otherwise, they will revert back immediately to swamps. This represents a cycle. So a cycle of the humanity that goes in 4 or 5 phases, from a beginning and a complete structuration into an organic system. Then you might have a crisis. In general, you have a crisis when the system is not anymore in balance, and then whatever in general happens is that it reverts back to the first level. Of course, not in the sense that you go back to zero, but in the sense that there is a step back in which the system will use old structures, you know, of the previous cycles. Now, according to different areas and different civilizations, this system works in different ways. For instance, you know, if the 4 squares and so on in diagonal could be typical of the Mediterranean world and other areas. For instance, somebody asked me one day, where is Iran? And so in the end, I arrived to the conclusion Iran is made by these 2 squares, where you have a system that works before on top of the high plain, because it's a plateau, Iran, basically. A plateau that maximum can arrive to develop the slopes that are at the edges of this plateau. But when it goes in crisis, it goes back to the plateau. No problem. You know, every civilization has developed a way of using the soil, the land that they had, and they have to adapt themselves. So they developed along 4 squares, or in Italy, even 2 cycles. That means 8, you know, something like that, back and forth. some of them remain on top of the ridges. There is a region in Algeria called the Kabylia that where they settled. It was balanced. It was agriculture, arboriculture, trees, apples, fruit, and they remained in that situation for millennia until the arrival of the French. That means 130 years ago or something like that. Well, so in few words, when we want to study a landscape in a given area or make a project of urbanism and so on, if we believe that the history is giving to us the principles, the rules for the design, we have in a certain way to reconstruct all the process of the historical process of the formation of that territory, of that city, and so on. Because the vision that we have to have is not only a vision into the present situation, that's very limited and so on. It's very phenomenological. It gives the sense of the skin of the problem, the sense of the skin of the problem. If we want to understand really deeply the structure of the system, we have to know it from the origin, through the evolution, up to the end. In the case of the territory, starting from the ridges that are schematically represented to the left, and looking at what the plains must be in that time, completely flooded. So you imagine why they remain on top of the ridges, because it was impossible for populations, tribes, groups to cross a space like that. No, and therefore they were able to move along the ridges, in between of the sources of the rivers or the streams, and they were able to settle in the fork, for instance, in the small promontories that were the closest point to the water, without crossing the streams, because they had no ability of doing that. In the second phase, that we call cross ridge, that means slope mid-level, moving on the same topo line, okay, the same height. They are able to cross the streams at a high level where the level of the water is very low, and connect some of those settlements. In the same time, this is a cross ridge path. In the same time, the old ridge is abandoned because economically less interesting and so on. But another thing I want to show you is the fact that there are moments in which the two ridges, they can find a ford, cross a stream. At that point, this point becomes important because it will be most probably one of the most important settlements that will develop, in the history and so on, because they are very important nodes of a territory or a landscape. This is one, this is two, or this is a scheme that is completely invented. But what is interesting is that if you see the history through the evolution, you are also able to understand better what a physical structure is. So this little town to the right or to the left, they are both in north of Rome, in Italy. They are hill towns. Both are based on a ridge path that becomes at the end a promontory. The right one is called Collodi, is a very narrow ridge. So basically, it looks like the stick of like a stick. But you know, when you evaluate that, you don't say it's like a stick. You say this is a structure that comes from a ridge, which a typical form. The left one, you say this is a typical structure that comes from a ridge, but since the ridge is large enough, there is an increase, an increment in this direction so that it doubles, you know, and so on. But you have a scientific vision and not a sort of, let's say, a visual vision of the thing. That allows also to understand a structure that looks chaotic at the first sight, like this settlement in Liguria, north of Italy, that looks chaotic in itself. But if you are able to dismantle this chaos based on this ability that or information that you have got from the historical process, you read immediately that, for instance, this part is generated by a ridge that is sloping down, arriving up to this point here. Okay, please note that in this point there is the main square, and there is a main square because you also have a secondary structure that it moves on the same level, topo line, goes through the square or something like this and gets out here. Okay, so there is a linear structure that crosses the structure of the ridge, and you have another level lower and therefore newer, I mean more recent, that is this one. Okay, that you said here disappears here and so on. The first operation, you have to remove the parts that are clearly encroachments, okay? So when you remove those that have no significance, the structure will appear very, very clearly. And this is what is left, offered, for instance, and many more things, but this is what is offered by the history to the designer that has to put the hands on top of this structure. You cannot avoid the fact that you have a system that of a ridge, two parallel system of the cross ridges, and so on and so forth. You cannot make inventive puppets on top of it. End of it, but just I show you a small thing that is also a bit amusing. I organized a course of landscape based on these concepts in Italy when I was teaching in America. So I brought American students to Tuscany, and with a nice colleague of mine, we gave this course 1 month in the countryside. We were lodged there. It was very nice. So in the morning we had the theory, and they used to study seriously. Then in the afternoon we used to go around to see the ridges, to see this, to see that, and they had to sketch and so on. At the end of the course, we said, now you have to make a sort of exam. And so we gave to every student one piece of what we called a sort of imaginary Italy, okay? A sort of invented cartography in which there were only the rivers, the topo lines, and few informations and so on. Something about the geology that is important, etc., etc. Then we said, okay, now you reconstruct this simulation of the historical process of the of this place, and let's see what happens. So they made a first drawing in which they have remarked the ridges, the hypothetical settlements in promontories, and so on. Then the second phase, they have marked the cross ridges and other settlements connected with the cross ridges, and so on. They made hypothetical bit of agriculture. initiatives there, etc., etc. Then, at the bottom of the in the third phase, at the bottom of the valley, they have imagining a minimal development of more, let's say, not industrial agriculture, but a bit more organized agriculture that you see here and here and here. The creation of some important service settlements, service little towns. Right in the bottom of the. In this case, there were no planes, so basically the system grew always there, but without many changes. So this was one of the exercises. In reality, those cartographies were real pieces of Italy. At that point, we sorted, the original cartography of the present situation, and it was very funny to compare. What was the simulation of the growth of this area, and what is the reality? There were differences, as you can imagine, because well, it's not an easy exercise. There were some coincidences, and it was an interesting exercise that I recommend, because it's very useful. Okay. Now we move we change scale, and I'll show you what applied to the scale of the building type of the typical aggregation, or yes, aggregation, or the plan of the city, the bigger scale. So 3 different scales. What could be this reconstruction, let's say, okay? Now, first of all, I mentioned several times the word type. Because I strongly believe that this sort of work that you make of simulation and reconstruction of the evolution of the history, either you have all documentations, but you don't have many, as you can imagine, no? Or you have to work with this idea of the type. That is the vehicle, in my opinion, of this operation. So, very quickly, we define this idea of type, or my idea, what I propose to you, and then we go back to the scheme. Type is the organic ensemble of the common characters of buildings in a given area and over a defined period of time. So, in few words, type is an abstraction, is a concept, not a real building, that in general a collectivity has about what is an house, what is how the house should be aggregated, with what kind of plots, okay, which size, whatever. And I insist on this concept. It is a product of the collectivity. It never happens that a single individual gets up in the morning and said, I will invent a type, the type of the row house. The row house is a long product of transformation within a community made by a certain community. The other important thing is that the type, in my concept, it changes in the time, because the collectivity changes, and they produce different ideas of the house, of the type. It changes also geographically, because from a place to another place, the type will be different. This is very important, because in synthesis, we can say that the concept of type is a dynamic process and never a formal scheme. Some people, like Giulio Carlo Gan, for instance, they believe it is a formal scheme, and the story is totally different in this case. why the idea of working with the type is useful in any case, besides that it is true. Because, you can also study the small settlement in a period, and you can study, for instance, all the roofs of the houses of a certain South Bend, to discover at the end that in a certain period the type of the roof it was one. That means that you study 1,000 roofs just to discover that the way of making the roof in a certain area, 17th century, etc., it was one. So at that point, if you are able to work with the idea of the type, detect, catch the type, that will simplify this work that otherwise will be very long. Otherwise, good luck. What you see now is the final reconstruction already done of a typological process. I call that typological process what I used to call before the historical process, because it is typological. And it is basically a reconstruction made out of the documents in relation of a place. This is an invented place that you see. Suppose it is a small, medium-sized town in Italy. That will make everything easier. Then you work with the documents. You work with the idea of permanence of the signs that you read in the topography, in the buildings, in the sites, in the streets, and so on. And of course, there is also a component of ability of working with the typical behaviors. No, so when suppose that you are reading the urban fabric. No, I always start from the urban fabric, because the idea of type comes out in the urban fabric, because you have many houses together. If you start the houses one by one, scattered here and there, it is extremely, it's more difficult. So you're working on this fabric, very elementary, initial, no, that refers to a type, an idea of type that is fundative. It is the first one. And later on, you work with the types that are current. I mean, current means that are known by everybody, and they are shared by the community. So I was saying, if in this here, you get information enough, and then you're able to go on, then you see what happens. But then in the third, you also detect and understand the third phase, but you don't have information about the second. You are able to fill this gap, through the typical behaviors that you have learned, about cases, but also you have to, in a certain way, use your ability to imagine what is the passage that is missing. Okay. Now, so what happens in the first phase? The community has a clear idea of what is the type, how the house should be. They have clear ideas, but also how it should be aggregated. In this case, in a very simple 2 rows of houses along a street, something like that. And also the organization, suppose you have a problem of an obstacle, maybe it creates a fork. So you have a first simple plan of what will be a city one day. But there is an interesting fact that when the individuals of the community, they start to build their house, they have to apply to the reality this idea of type that is an abstraction. Suppose that they have to build the house along a slope. At that point, they have changed the idea of the type. They have modified this idea. So the real building will be slightly different, or you need one more room, or you have a plot that is irregular, trapezoidal, or things like that. So those are variations of the type that are, in any case, very important because all of them, these are the variations, you see, they contribute in time to the formation of the next idea of current type. No, you see a good solution of your neighbor and you say, oh, and then the community starts to absorb this idea. This system goes on. Of course, there are continuous influences between the scale, between the building type, the aggregation, and the typical plan of city. And in this way, this process. But the process of the growth of the city and the time, it's not always linear. No, you have a moment of crisis. Okay, I put here a line and I say, okay, there is a moment of crisis. Could be a plague, as in Italy in the medieval period in 1334, or could be an earthquake. It could be economical disaster, whatever. At that point, the current type that is connected to that is modified because the city is growing stops. People at that point build, transform what is existing, they adapt and so on, and therefore the current type doesn't develop. On the contrary, the variations, they go on because you still try to adapt to what exists and make variations of the existing types. So at the end of the hypothetical crisis, what happens? People have developed a knowledge, an ability of, and a knowledge, let's say, of many examples of variations and so on. But they have lost the idea of the current type. What they do at that point, they refer to a different culture, not different culture, sorry, to a different place or a different culture that you think is superior culturally, militarily, and so on. Typical case in Italy in the 19th century, the reference is Paris or Vienna, no problem. And what you import, types from those leading, let's say, cultures. Okay. Or if you are in North Africa, your reference is Istanbul because you belong to the Ottoman Empire. No, so and a new current type at that point is formed, mixing, hybridizing the variations, real building variations, and this ideal type coming from Vienna, Paris, and so on. In this sense, although in Italy every city was influenced by Vienna or Paris, the final product of the 19th century architecture and urbanism was different from city to city for the simple reason that it was also based on local experience. Fine. Sorry for this long digression. This process is long compared to the fact that you could, on the contrary, invent a puppet, sketch, things like that, and in 5 minutes solve with brackets the problem of the architecture. This is a way of the only way serious, in my opinion, scientific, to approach the problem of what do you get at the end. Oh, no, one thing I have to say. What I have described, going from the origin to the end, in reality, when you make it as a simulation, you start from the end, from here, and you go in this direction up to the origin when you find the foundative type. What do Now, this process is the way I have described this product. That is not only analytical, as you can imagine, because you know, you put together so many data, okay, but also you have to infill many gaps, and that is already an idea of a moment of synthesis that you have to introduce. So it is a sort of meta project what you make in reality, no? So a sort of redesign of this historical typological process. It's very long, but of course, with the experience, you can take some shortcuts, clearly. No, and looking at complicated structures like this city, this is an exquisite drawing of Algiers in 100 years ago. Beautiful, spontaneous, informal structures that show this change, you know, at the very micro level, you know, guys like this one that invades Alford Street, other guys that have this system of corbelled part of the house that is hanging on top of the street and so on, tunnels created between two houses that are facing one the other, or also the layout of the streets is extremely crowded. But you know, it is possible, I say, to understand and avoid too much analytical work with the shortcuts that are based on the typical behaviors of the urban fabric. Typical behaviors in the sense that everywhere in the world, you know, there are typical reaction of the man when he is rational. Okay, that means not modernist, basically. That are the same in China, in North Africa, in America, or in Italy. And I'll show you the examples. So at this point, first of all, when you have a drawing like this, which is a survey of the ground floor of a city, this is Sfax in Tunisia, you have the X-ray of the city, and you have the X-ray of the typological process. The problem is that the informations are too many so at the first sight it's extremely difficult to read it. So there are certain moves that you can make. The first one is that you realize that a group, when they settle, they in general tend to make regular settlements. And so in this sense, it means that even a city like Sfax, that is a city a Medina of 50,000 inhabitants, is made out of different settlements in the time, made maybe by different cultures. So the first technique to separate the information, so you draw with different colors the different orientations on every wall. And you discover that the walls don't go casually around, but they are grouped in various groups. In general, every group has a color, or every group in a certain period has a different color from another. And so you are able to start to give an idea of chronology, for instance. You are able, if you have the contour lines underneath that, you can realize if you have, for instance, a former river that was closed and that was covered, or things like that. But if you are able also to measure all those parallel lines, you sometimes find that there are minimum common denominators. And that means that some of them are, a grid will come out, one or more grids, okay? That means that those areas were planned or semi-planned, okay? So in this case of fact, for instance, very clearly comes out a grid that is based on the iridium, which is a Roman measure that is 120 feet by 240 feet. And clearly a module like a module, you know, is a standard, is a signature of a civilization. So when you get this measure, this is Roman. So, for instance, nobody says that this is a Roman city. I tell you, this is a Roman city. And this is the next step. There is also a pre-existing structure underneath, that is this one, of which I am not able to tell you anything unless we have archaeological evidence and so on. And I didn't go very far with it. But this is what you can get. There are other typical behaviors that will help a lot. For instance, you know, when you see this fork, I call this mustache, or the mark of the hand on the ground. And we have one, we have another one here, and we have another one here, okay, smaller. And we have this strange orientation of all the streets here that go in this direction here. This is Sevilla. Sevilla is a Roman city. I give you the information. The old Roman city is here, okay? So when you see the mustache, well, they in general reveal a condition in which you have a sort of funnel effect. So that means that there is a flow that is stopped and tends to pass from a passage that is compulsory and no other options are offered. So what could be a gate, could be bridge, or could be reverse, not an external gate of a city, but an internal gate of an important building, for instance. So that attracts, you know, the flow of the people, therefore also the paths. And in fact, you know, this place is called Porta Catalina. The gate doesn't exist anymore, but we have evidence from this typical, okay, reaction of the parts. We have the other gate, I don't remember the name here, number 3. The number 4 is a bridge. Could be a gate, but we know it's a bridge by the fact that the old bed of the river was here, and we have documentation for that, and then it has been moved here. So this is an old bridge. This one is another case. When the Arabs conquered Sevilla, they built the great mosque at the outside of the Roman city, at the edges of it. But that attracted the population in such a way that they modified even the morphology of the main streets that were pointing into the main. Well, often you will find many curves into the morphology of the streets of your fabric, and it looks chaotic and irrational at the first sight. But then, on the contrary, it's very important because often the curves will reveal something that is hidden but not more visible. This is the case of 3 small towns in Italy, Roman towns. And what is visible in the present fabric is this growth of red lines, streets. All of them clearly are tangent to something, or they avoid something. So clearly they take this form because they avoid the corner of maybe wall, or they make a curve because they point straight into a gate and so on. So it's possible through this crowd of curves to rescue, to find, to discover walls of a Roman or precedent old city, and the gates, the position of the gates, not necessarily always symmetrical. Look at this one. In negative, that means, through the effects produced by the obstacle, in the case, the walls. In other cases, when we are in Fez, and this is the main mosque, the great mosque, Friday Mosque of Fez, still existing. You see here the deformation induce look into the morphology of the streets that tend to avoid the corner, here, and then they go straight. Here it goes tangent to it, to the wall, tangent to the wall, and then it separates and so on. If the mosque weren't there, we can imagine that there was, in any case, a big structure, regular, there, that was hidden by the time, by the way. Another case, very quickly, this is in Tunis, a small settlement, probably of a group, rather regular, but not planned, you see here. And in time, you see that the behavior of the street tend to go around, avoiding the corner here, leaving some leftover space around, like this. This is a tangent in this direction. And then in a second time, all this part is being infilled, probably by the same people of the group, obviously, not that use all the possible space that is left over. We call that increment or implementation, growth also of the fabric. Another thing that you can note is the position of this moustache. That tells me that probably the old entrance and unique entrance into this small settlement and within Tunis was here. And then, it happens as usually houses or land is subdivided, it changes and so on. And so historically, now the entrance is here. Important mechanism that will tell you a lot of information, which will help you a lot, is looking at the behavior of the aggregation of the fabric of the houses or the buildings, and what is the relation of this behavior to the street, to the public street. This is a diagram that I have invented, so it's not real, but imagine there is a river, there is a bridge, and there is a natural first path that is a sort of natural path that goes not straight, because in the countryside you avoid, obstacles and so on. So this path is the original one. Along this path, people, the group, then started to settle, and they built their houses along the path. Tendentially, the plot tend to be perpendicular to the street itself, because it is more logic. Now, of course, they can plan, and they can settle along the path for kilometers if they want. But it's not logic, because after a certain distance, it makes sense that you use also the rear, the back part of the system, the area like this. No. So, for instance, after certain, you start to plan your block. So basically, this also tells the story of the formation of the spontaneous blocks of city, of a spontaneous city. And, you from the beginning to the end, you stop when it is logic for you to stop. And in general, the measure of this front of the street is part of the culture, no? So in a city, they tend to have longer blocks. In a city, they tend to make shorter blocks. And that is really the cultural component. But then at a certain point, it makes sense that you move your fabric into the rear, and you implant streets, secondary streets, we call them implant or planned streets, like this one, for instance, and so on. If you look at the behavior, you see immediately a difference, because this behavior, this part of the matrix fabric goes from the beginning to the end of the block. This one starts from here, because the rest is occupied, and goes up to the end. And this goes up to the end. The end is decided by the culture. They decide. In Rome, we have long blocks of even 60 meters. In other cases, in other cities, we have 24 meters and 30 and so on. Again, after a certain distance, you feel the need to close and to have a connection, no? That is another street, a third level of street of connection between two planned streets, in order that at this point the block is closed. And at this point, again, the fabric is typical, because it will go from here to here. So basically, it will infill the leftover space. In this case, for instance, no houses, because the block is very long and very narrow, and therefore there's no this opportunity, but both streets are connections streets. There's a fourth important level of the streets, that is, let's take a case that our city grew reasonably, etc. And the original point, the bridge, is becoming a very important node or even pole of the city. So important point of reference, economical, symbolic, and so on. In the fabric inside of the city, there is a very important other node that is growing, a cathedral, imagine. So at this point, the attraction that is made by these two poles, economic and so on, is so important that it becomes interesting and economically to make a shortcut to cut through the fabric, okay, and connect these two points. Osman did everywhere interventions like this in Paris, but we have also interventions smaller in the medieval cities, in Italy, or in the Islamic cities too, and so on. How do you recognize them? It's very simple. Since you cut normally, in general, diagonally, casually into the existing fabric, the plots that will remain, that will be recuperated from the old fabric, and they now face the new street. All these plots are triangular. They are not rectangular, in few words. They are triangular, trapezoidal, or they are rectangular but cut diagonally on one side. So it's very important. Why this is important? Because at this point, you are able to establish an hierarchy of the streets of your place, and also chronology in a certain way. So we are, making steps, learning, more and more. So we also can decide from the behavior more in detail. We have Cairo one in Tunis. This is a triangular plot with three streets around. Which one is the matrix? The most important, the first one. The matrix, is the yellow. The yellow because being built in the empty area, you know, they can develop the type exactly according to the idea of the type, okay? Here the houses are, you know, because of the form of the site, but also because, you know, it is already occupied, you know, it is deformed. So this difference makes the fact that this is a planned street and this one is a matrix. And this, look, you know, this is basically an infill of the connection. This thing is very interesting because not only you establish the hierarchy, not establish a coherent a chronology, but you also discover interesting things. This is a city in Morocco. It's called Essaouira. It's unusual because it's a city that was inhabited by a majority of Jews, about more than 50%. And according to the history, you know, the documents, you know, it was designed, planned by a French architect called Cornu, according to a system of cardo de cumanos. Voila, this is the cumanos, you see, straight, and this is the cardo, voila, straight, intersecting in the center with the market. So this is the story. Then you read this thing and you make a distinction of you drawing in red what is the behavior of a matrix and what is the behavior of the plan streets, yellow, okay, and then you have also some you know, connections, gray, like this here. So okay, what you expect, you know, to find a matrix is along the two axes. Obviously, it was planned, it was founded, and it should be there. Strangely, it's very rare. Only at the end, here, along what was the real ghetto of the Jews, you find this red. But where you find the red? Here, where you don't expect. This is a most probably an old path that was existing. It was existing because there were, for sure, settlements of Berbers, you know, here around, not connected, no, in this area, for sure, you know, you see, those are just all connections, you know, very, very winding and irregular and so on. So in this sense, you know, you add more and more information, you know, through this kind of operation that you make on the typical behavior, based on the typical behavior. The last thing about this redesign, let's say, of the meta, this meta project of the sites of the cities, is what I call the archaeology without excavation, because you know, since we want to know what is underneath, but we cannot excavate. Rarely we can make archaeology. What we have to relate are the permanence, the sign that come out on the ground level of something that is underneath. Again, you know, this is Hammamet. It's a very interesting city in Tunisia. And according to the history, it says it was built in the 14th century around this fortress that you see here by a local Muslim sheikh or sultan. And but if you have a fantastic plan like this, and then you measure again, you know, all the alignments and so on. Here, this is very regular. You can see, you discover that it is based on a standard that is based on the Actus, which is 120 by 120 Roman feet. At this point, you know, this is not 14th century. This is a Roman, okay, structure transformed. The other interesting thing is that out of the signs that you can read into, you see that you have some curves that all end in certain points. Particularly this mustache is very interesting, but also this here. So you can detect that there was a certain point out of this Roman city, a small village, you know, of 2.5 acres, very small, right there. So this is what, grosso modo, is the thing. As I said, all the time that you work with the level of the fabric, you can project your attention on the smaller scale, that of the building type. And for instance, in this case, I just show you the possible diagram of what is a hypothetical reconstruction of the courtyard house. According that we have here 3 different courtyard houses here in vertical. That means that is related to the orientation, no? In relation with the orientation and how they get encroached. So this is the description of one of the processes of transformation of this courtyard house. This is what we say encroachment, insulation, densification. So in few words, you know, this is a single family house, but if I built a small, tiny row houses inside, then I start to densify and so on until you get a palace, even a palace. This, for instance, applies well, for instance, in Rome, this big scheme. But in part, you know, some part of this applies to Venice, you know, that clearly has a different tradition, different condition. There is a water in Venice and not in Rome. Or finally, for instance, you know, always talking of courtyard houses, it could happen that what is a spontaneous formation of a block, you know, becomes codified, as in this case in Cairo, where, you know, they, at a certain point, this formation of encroachment basically becomes what they call the wakala. That is a combination of a commercial structure and a residential, mainly for artisans. So basically, the ground floor that you see here is only botteghe, no shops. You enter with a monumental entrance into the courtyard where you have the shops. But at the mid-level, on top of it, you have this range of a sort of loggia or sort of portico that goes all over around on top of it. And that is for the atelier of the artisans. And then on top, you have all sort of row houses on 2-3 levels that belong to one family of an artisan. That this is clearly the transformation of original courtyard houses and into a row house. But the memory of the courtyard remains on top on the terrace. So every unit has, you know, it's on covered, it's on open to the sky terrace and so like that. Very complex structure, medieval in Cairo, medieval, imagine. But it's a part of this transformation, of course, from a spontaneous system into a codified. So there are many of those similar called the wakala, so a new type that we call the specialized. Let's finish the story in part. I have very few things, but now I have a question. So what, at the end of this typological reconstruction of the process, what the process will give us at the moment in which we make the real project, okay? Rules, a canovaccio. What a canovaccio is an Italian term of the theater, of the Renaissance theater. It's a theatrical text that summarizes the story and divides it into scenes, indicating the characters and events, but not the dialogue. So in few words, it's not a real text. It's just a very schematic text in which the actors were able to play, invent, and create a lot. Principles, principle means basic principles for the intervention in your or in that specific site, but giving a lot of possibility and space, and this is loved by the architects. This idea or nothing. Yeah, so clearly the archistars, they don't care all this history at all. They make their own history. They are self-referential. So, but we don't care them. So I don't know. I tend to like the idea of the rule or the canovaccio. The rule is like the idea, I think, sort of chess game in which you have very tight rules, very few, but thousands of possible moves. And so the fantasy in reality is not a lot at all. You can play, but you have to respect certain rules that come from the history in this case. Canovaccio is again, you have a basic reference structure on which you can play, structure that you have to respect, but that gives you possibilities for your design. There is no problem about that. I leave this question to you because, well, we have to think about. And this is a question that we can discuss when you want. Now it's okay. If you give me a few minutes, I show you few projects that come out of this methodology, if you want. Most of them are projects of the students. And because in 50 years, I always took students abroad, mainly in the Islamic countries, sometimes also in Italy, etc. In America also, 3 times. And the reason is very simple. When I was a young researcher, assistant professor, I realized that all the students wanted they were pressed to create their brand, personal brand, personal language, because if you don't have a brand, you are not a serious architect, you are not in the market, and so on. And how do you create a brand? Well, the students used to copy from the last issue of the magazine. And there was a sort of a total conformism, and the banality, of the product. So the best solution was that of locking the library of the magazines of architecture. I didn't have that power, or taking them to countries where they don't have issues, they don't have magazines, and tell them, look, you go around. Look around, learn from the existing, the reality, the built reality produced by the history. And this is what we did. And of course, when they came back and they made their own project, the project of those sites, of course, the projects have many mistakes. But what is interesting is that many of them made an honest, serious tentative of reconstructing this typological process, and to give a solution that was coherent with this typological construction. You see here a project in Turkey, in Antakya, clearly very simple. It's a bazaar. It's a small bazaar that is inspired very much close to the local architecture, or an Hindu temple in Bundi. or again, a piece of residential fabric based on the interpretation of the local type in India. Again, it's Amber here, or this is the college, you know, in another city, you know, that use. I mean, it's clearly influenced definitely by this the local typology, and it's coherent, relatively coherent, and so on. And in Morocco, in that city, in Essaouira, that are the Jews, a possible extension of the city that actually puts together a fabric that is very much, you know, in line with the traditional one, with the hierarchy of open spaces. You see the bigger common garden, the common courtyard, you know, and every single apartment has its own little patio, you know. So there's an hierarchy of the interior spaces of the city in relation with the quality of the life of that country. And it comes always a compact, a very, very compact fabric, of course, because that is what you learn from those cultures there. At this point, I stop because I talked a lot. The real reason recently, no, a few years ago, I came to a thought about all this question, and I realized that why I was taking the students there, and why I was designing in the Islamic countries, the poor countries, and countries out of our culture, the Italian. And I realized that the most important thing and the most significant is the fact that those students going there, not copying from the magazines, trying to make and absorb a different culture, they have acquired a method of looking at the reality and history. And some of them, coming back to Italy and practicing in Italy, they have applied the method to their own culture. And now they make projects that are more coherent, more logic, and are not made out of stupid invention. I thank you very much. I'm sorry for I talked for a long time, and if somebody is still there, we can. I'm finished, and I thank you very much. I don't hear.
Yeah, no, sorry, just a second.
Okay.
He's coming just in the
I can
back.
hear this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attilio, for this wonderful presentation. Now I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions for you. And I would invite anybody in the room to come down here for asking Attilio any question. Please, Stephanos.
Mine is not the question, it's the statement of admiration for the work, for this lifetime process of searching, and trying to think of the world as being a world not of. Hold on.
Just a minute, Attilio. Un attimo. Un piccolo attimo.
Yeah. I was.
Hello.
Can you try second? I don't know which one it is, so we need to try each one of them.
One, yes. No,
No.
no, no,
Oh, it's not charged.
no,
Okay.
yes, no,
No,
no.
no,
Okay.
no. Okay.
You can come here also.
Sorry.
Sorry, we had difficulty. Professor Petruccioli, we had difficulties with the microphone. There is a free microphone that apparently is out of battery. So Stefanos, the dean of the school, is coming here to make his statement.
Yep.
It's not a statement. It's just I want to express my admiration for your work and to also state that it's very close to the pedagogy of the School of Architecture and what we're teaching our students to do. The only thing that is very unusual about it and very important to understand and to apply are the lessons that you're learning in Islamic cities, which allow for a great deal of compression in the public space and in the proper allocation of private and public space within the city as a whole, and also retains a balance between monuments and fabric in a way that is unique and terribly unusual, and very relevant to things that we need to do in the future everywhere in the world to contain auto mobility and to generate maximum walkable environments. I think that we are applying this method in the school. We're working on it. We're visiting different countries and thinking about different ways of working in these countries as well. So we'd like to stay in touch with you and learn more and do more. I don't know whether others want to say something more in a questioning mode or other mode, but I think this is hopefully the beginning of a discussion we want to have together and not the end of a lecture. There is a question I didn't ask you a question.
Okay.
We might as well have a question or two. Thank you again very much for your time.
Oh, I'm plenty of time, no problem. All the night.
Attilio, thank you. My question is, this typological process of analysis and the designs that it generates, you began in the core of the lecture, there were many cities that are designed on slopes, right, with a great level of topographical change. And then we looked through the development of these streets in plan, but then some of the student work showed a sophisticated understanding of how to handle design on slopes. I'd want to know some of the advice that you could offer for how maybe this process or another process enables in a studio setting to teach people how to design on slopes.
Well, okay. And first of all, in order to reply to the first professor, I mentioned that we walk on the same side of the street. And I knew that because I know your school since 40 years. I thought in a program that was parallel to Notre Dame in Rome for 12 years at Pratt. And so I met some of the professors that were there. I attended also some reviews, and I knew that actually you are moving in the same direction. Then we have some differences, but that is the fun. So given that, the question is very interesting, of course, about the slopes. The slope in itself, it doesn't change the problem or the attitude that you have to have. The slope, for instance, generates curves that are curves and forks that are typical, a technique to connect levels, for instance, and so on. And those, you can easily recognize when you have a certain experience. Of course, if you have a cartography with the topo lines, that will immediately help you a lot. And in this way, you are able to make a difference between the curves that depends from obstacles and curves that depends from the difference of level. So it's based on the technique and those replies to a problem that are typical always. So with a certain experience, you recognize them easily. All this method is also based on experience. That means that the first time that you read a fabric, you get mad. But after 50, you recognize easily. I mean, it's always difficult, but you move faster, and you can move and recognize all the problems. Now, if you want, I open a question, a big question, on which we have to think, not immediately, but I'm thinking. I'm very curious about the artificial intelligence, because imagine now that very soon, and even now, but very soon, the artificial intelligence will be able to make all that complicated reconstruction, a redesign, recomposition, okay, that I have explained to you rapidly, etc., etc., because it will be able to recognize forms, and then statistically will tell you immediately this could be this or that, but in 1 second, So imagine that all this process that now takes between 1 week and 6 months, depending on the difficulty of the place, as you can imagine, it could be done in minutes. But now it opens a big issue, no? Because it means that it will open, in my opinion, to people that have an attitude, a scientific attitude to the design. And they have a large culture of the design. So if you want, not the people that make a sketch, a puppet, all that stuff, okay? They will be able to control this process. Otherwise, the problem is that the artificial intelligence has a tendency to invent, because they want to please you always. And if they don't have a reply, they invent. And this is a big problem, because if you know the process, if you know how to handle, you say, what are you doing? What are you saying? And so on. But anyway, now I don't go too far. And it's an open problem. It is extremely interesting. But what is more amusing is that with this artificial intelligence, the archistars that make strange buildings and so on, will be put out of the market by the milkman that, working with this computer, will make an house, his own house, that will be even more strange than the Zaha project, for instance.
Attilio, we have a question here, and it's from Kimberly Kulhas, who says, thank you so much, Attilio Petruccioli. I was probably in Rome, in the Rome program with Frank Montana when we were studying hill towns, and our design project was a hill town. Thank you for all of your research over these past 40 years. I need to run to another meeting. Just wanted to say that I appreciate you and your work.
Thank you. I remember Professor Montana. So you can imagine how old I am.
Is there any other question from the audience, please? Okay, it seems that there's no question, Attilio. So thank you again, and for this wonderful talk. and ci vediamo a Roma.
Ci vediamo a Roma. I'm there. So I wait for all of you.
Okay.